Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from today. Pollinators, we know, provide a vital ecosystem service to the agricultural industry, but are we doing enough to help our pollinators and the wider biodiversity on farms across the country? Today, we're joined by Ruth Wilson, Farmland Pollinator Officer from the National Biodiversity Data Centre, working on the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and Dr. Catherine Keena, Countryside Management Specialist with Teagasc, and also a member of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan Steering Committee. Ruth and Catherine, you're very welcome to this morning's webinar.
How are you, Mark?
Hi, nice to be here.
Great. So, Catherine, thanks for joining us this morning. You're going to help us with the questions later on, and some of the answers as well, hopefully, because this is a very topical area. And so, Ruth, maybe you could just introduce yourself to our audience this morning and some background on yourself, maybe.
Yes, thank you very much. Excuse me for the invitation to speak today. I'm the Farmland Pollinator Officer with the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and that's implemented through the National Biodiversity Data Centre based out of Waterford. And my role really is we realise how important farmland is for our pollinators and wider biodiversity. So it's a very interesting role, and just to engage with farmers as much as possible. I was previously a biodiversity officer with a local authority, but I grew up on a farm, so that was really what drew me into the post. So,
right. So you have a deep understanding of the cycles of what happens at a farm level.
Yeah.
And the early mornings, of course, as well.
And the late evenings.
And the late evenings, indeed. So Ruth, if you could maybe share your presentation with us there. You're going to give us some practical tips on what farmers can do on their farms to improve biodiversity. But just while you're doing that, to remind everybody that you can send us your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we'll endeavour to get through as many of those as possible during the session. Today's session has been recorded and will be available on the Teagasc website, the Teagasc YouTube channel, and also available as a podcast, so you can enjoy listening to the Signpost webinar while you're driving or doing some gardening, whatever it might be. So that's available on all of the most popular podcast platforms. So that's great, Ruth. We can see your presentation clearly there. So I'll hand over to you, and we'll chat to you afterwards.
You can see the screen okay? Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So yes, thank you very much for letting me speak this morning. And I was just going to outline, just to give a wee outline about the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and then just some simple actions or what to look out for on your farm that can help pollinators and wider biodiversity. And just to thank the Department of Agriculture, who fund the post within the Biodiversity Data Centre and supporting the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. So just looking at Ireland and the wonderful biodiversity that we have. We've over 30,000 species living in 117 habitats, so it is very biodiversity rich in Ireland, and it's wonderful if we can, help that biodiversity, because it is in decline, and that's a huge problem, and we depend so much on it. So it's really working with nature to help it. The Pollinator Plan has taken pollinators as an important element in biodiversity. It's an easy tool to let us understand, the impact that we have on pollinators and wider biodiversity, and we can communicate that as a simple, clear message. We can also monitor the changes, and always protecting pollinators, and it's good for wider biodiversity as well. Sometimes it can seem complex what we're talking about when we say to protect biodiversity, but it's really just to break it down and make it, as simple as possible. Just to run through some of the benefits of biodiversity, economy and wealth. It's in Ireland, you would know apples and oilseed rape as benefiting from the service of pollination, which is free. that benefits us, our economy and wealth. For our general health and well-being, then we get a lovely wide variety of fruit and vegetables that are nice and plump and well developed because of pollination, and because pollination happened. And then our wild plants also benefit greatly from the service of pollination, and that helps them become resilient. And also we'll all be familiar with the lovely harvest at the end in the autumn that all biodiversity benefits from, fruits and seeds. Just to say a wee bit about pollinators, we have over 100 bee species in Ireland. Some people may not be aware of that. So we have one managed honeybee that lives in a hive. Then we have our wild pollinators, which are the majority. We have 21 bumblebees and 80 solitary bees. And unfortunately, our wild pollinators are, a third of our wild pollinators are threatened with extinction in Ireland. So they're not doing so well. The honeybees are doing okay, and there's more beekeepers, so they're actually doing okay in numbers. And we do a bumblebee monitoring project that has shown that decline, and it's sort of 4% year on year, a decline. Even common species like the common carder bee is now showing a decline, and some of the rare bumblebees are showing severe decline. And this is really because a loss of semi-natural habitat and just a consequence of how we manage the rest of the landscape. So within the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, you may be aware, the first plan was 2015 to 2020. And we're now on phase 2, and that's 21 to 25. The momentum built up in the first plan, and it's just trying to push that forward and keep it going. And it's being supported by government, local communities, education authorities as well. So a really good momentum. The first objective is farmland, to make farmland more pollinator friendly. And that's the team there. Dr. Una Fitzpatrick is the chair and manager of the Pollinator Plan, and myself as the farmland officer. And along the agriculture line, then we have an agribusiness advisor as well for the businesses that are on board. And in this new plan, one of my roles is really a lot more direct engagement with farmers out on the ground, chatting to them and supplying information, directing them to get information, and training as well, and develop more evidence-based resources. We'll also be doing, as part of the data centre, we do an annual farmland festival. So that takes place in May, and definitely one to look out for on social media. And it's a lovely project to get engage with and support. And it's really just to celebrate the lovely biodiversity, amazing biodiversity that is on farmland. And also the track changes. The project started last year, a pollinator monitoring scheme that will be monitoring across Ireland how our pollinators are doing. I just mentioned quickly an EIP project, Protecting Farmland Pollinators. It's run out of the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and it's looking at whole farm pollinator scoring, results based, and there's a good response, and the officer Sorla may come along later to chat to you, but it's really how we can farm, as we farm, be more biodiversity and pollinator friendly, not to impact on the farm business. And there's going to be some lovely resources produced through this project. We've already got that. We're creating solitary bee sites on the farm. There's a lovely farmland hoverflies and farmland moths posters. So watch out for the resources coming from this project. Just to say about our bumblebees, and this is our 21 bumblebees. About 8 of them may be more common, and the others are just they've retracted and are in just certain areas, but a really fantastic, you wouldn't be surprised, you'd be surprised at how many different types there are. Just to say a wee bit about the bumblebee life cycle. They come out, so this is a lovely time actually to be keeping your eyes peeled for them now. They come out of hibernation. There's been a few spotted already, so definitely a good time to keep an eye out. And anything that's flowering early, so willow and dandelion. If you look around your farm yourself, you will see those just starting to come out, and that's where the pollinators will head. So they need food early. They need a nest site. Then when that queen gets her food, she will be looking for a nest site to set up her nest for the year. She will put food in the nest, and the young, then she will lay eggs, and they will become the female workers, and she will stay and keep laying eggs, and the female workers then will be looking food. After the cycle, there's just a fresh queen bumblebee will hibernate over the winter. So she needs food at the end of the autumn. So late flowering ivy, knapweed, anything like that is fantastic. And then she'll find a safe place to hibernate. This is our amazing 80 different types of solitary bees. Come in all shapes and sizes. And once you start looking for them, actually, you get your eye homed in. Some can be quite small, but fascinating little bees. And again, their life cycle, they come out early, and they come out at different times and have different food. They'll go for different food. There's early ones are just feeding on willow, and then the ones just feeding on ivy. So nature is all keyed in together. They'll need a nest site. Some are cavity nesting, so you could supply a log, and there's details on our website on how to do this through the EIP project. And that's the cavity nesting ones. And then there's most are ground nesting, that wee diagram of the tunnel. So she does a little tunnel and puts an egg and a little parcel of food in the tunnel, and then the young will stay there till now, and they'll be thinking of coming out as it gets warmer. Just to say a wee bit about how far pollinators travel, and that helps us understand really why we need to be flower rich across our landscape. So there's the bumblebee, can go about 1 kilometre from the nest site foraging out. In general, go about 1 kilometre, and then the little solitary bee just goes a few 100 meters, so it doesn't fly far. And a study has been done that if the solitary bee has to go further, it will reduce how well she can produce and rear, have your little eggs with a food parcel. So it's very important. Also, just to say, one of the main things is that we need flower in our landscape from early spring to late autumn. So, you may think just get summer, lots of flower, but that early flower and that late flower is so important. And those are some of our lovely native species just at the bottom there that with nature's timing, they come out at different times of the year. And just to mention that hoverflies, we have over 180 hoverfly species, and they're very varied, and you would see them around the farm if you take a look. Not to compete now with the barn owl from last week, the wonderful barn owl presentation from last week, but this little guy is the marmalade hoverfly just on that dandelion, and he's coined the farmer's friend in the insect world. So that's his larva. I don't know, you can see it circled in red. So he's an aphid muncher. Absolutely, the female will find the aphids and lay her eggs there. So the wonderful predator control for the farmers. And they're so varied, and some of them are very important in recycling organic matter as well. Then just to say, our wonderful moths as well, they complement the daytime pollinators. If you can think of honeysuckle being lovely and scented in the evening, So that's the honeysuckle is dependent on bringing in nighttime pollinators. So they're complicated as well because they may need a different caterpillar food and then nectar and pollen as an adult. So we've got some lovely ones there. The caterpillar of the pebble prominent feeds on willow poplar, and the lovely yellow swallowtail, then it feeds on, you can see that being a real hedgerow species, blackthorn, hawthorn, goat willow, elder ivy, and the lovely early thorn there, again, very hedgerow, blackthorn, hawthorn. I was just putting up this wee 6-spot burnet moth to explain that stripy caterpillar will feed on the wee yellow plant, which is bird's foot trefoil. And it's stripy because it's telling birds, it's quite dramatic, don't eat me, because it wouldn't be so good for the bird. So that's its defense as a caterpillar. And then it goes into the lovely little cocoon, little papery cocoon, and comes out as the adult. And the adult then feeds on, that's on knapweed there, and it'll also feed on vetches and stuff. So they need different plants at different times. And then we have other insects that help with pollination, butterflies, beetles, wasps, and ants, and that will also help with pollination. And then just to see, to look at our landscape and farmland and what has happened in the last 50 years, it has become less flower rich, and that has affected our insect populations. So I'm just going to go through 10 actions here. I've tried to use as many photos as possible, just so that you can get an idea of what we're talking about. And that's to get food, shelter and safety in the landscape. I always say the first thing would be to get a wee farm map and just see what you have on the farm, because you might be surprised what you may think is just a wee rough area is probably very good for biodiversity. So find the best places on your farm. Semi-natural habitat, that's maybe a big word, but it's just hedgerows, wetlands, woodlands, individual trees, meadows, pastures, anything like that. And it's keep those wee rough areas and maintain them. They may need a bit of help, a bit of restoration. And then the last thing would always be to create, but it's first to maintain what you have. I just running through some of the habitats there so you get an idea. There's a lovely hawthorn tree that is existing, fantastic tree, and they make a lovely tree. The middle photo there, that's a group of cherry trees, lovely wild cherry trees on top of a tillage field. And that wee corner is just lovely for biodiversity and pollinators. And then it depends, your hedgerow might be escaped, or any sort of a hedgerow, fantastic for pollinators, and, get it in help, and if it needs a wee bit of work to make it better for pollinators. Wouldn't be so much now semi-natural grassland around, but if you have any, and even where you look for, it might be in the corner of a field, a verge, wonderful if you can maintain that, it'd be a top habitat for pollinators. A wee wetland area, now that's maybe just a bit, that's an old drain there that's got wooded and lovely marsh marigold growing in it there. But any wetland area is also good, essential for pollinators and biodiversity. Non-farmed areas, I just stuck this one in. This farmer has the cow tracks in the farm. He's got some thistles growing there, so it's not being farmed, the area. And he actually named one of them Thistle Lane because it was, and the bumblebees there was a bumblebee on every flower, just fantastic. Then just to look at hedgerows, how important hedgerows are, and what you're after are thick base, foliage to the ground, tall, continuous without gaps. It's so important that they form a network really across your farm, sort of like a highway, and that helps. It'll help you the value to your livestock with hedge, shelter, shade, and it helps with soil as well. So they're good for us and good for pollinators and wildlife. You could have a hedgerow tree in it, and then margins either side, not cultivated, is also good. It gives that boost to the hedgerow and to pollinators and wildlife. I was just going through some of the wee plants. If you're out, this is a lovely time of the year now to be looking into the hedge and see what you've got. Usually they're mostly hawthorn, whitethorn and blackthorn. Hawthorn would be the dominant species. It's fantastic and makes a great hedge. But blackthorn and willow just coming out now. That's that early food that is fantastic for pollinators. I've put holly in there. It's always nice to have a mix. This is some of the plants I've just popped up to, mix in with your hedge. Spindle, that's the wee delicate flower of spindle. You mightn't see it, but you might notice the little fruit at the end of the year, scarlet, pink, and quite, you wouldn't think that's a native plant. So a fantastic wee plant. Elder, honeysuckle, gelder, rose, dog rose. So it's important if you can incorporate these into your hedge as well. Two species that may be overlooked, bramble and ivy. Bramble is fantastic. It flowers relatively early, and that goes through right to, I've still seen them flowering in October, even November. And if you watch a patch of elder on a sunny bank, a patch of bramble on a sunny bank, you hopefully will see bumblebees, and they just move from flower to flower. Amazing resource, as is ivy late in the year. And if you've ever looked closely into an ivy flower, they're really quite stunning. So two plants that sometimes we try to control around the hedgerow or farm, but if you can leave areas, fantastic. Then just in the management, A-shape's best, that to get that nice thick bottom. And if it's an escaped hedge, this is a wonderful escaped hedge here in the image. And it may be that you don't cut it because it's so valuable as it is, or you may need to do a wee side trim if that's what you need on the farm. And moving into the pollinator friendly trees, again, I've mentioned willow again. Other wee pollinator friendly trees would be crabapple, again the hawthorn, I've mentioned that, wild cherry as well, and rowan. And that's just the form that the pollinator friendly trees tend to be a nice form. They're a nice compact small tree. There's a hawthorn and the cherry. Willow, now the different willows, some can be a bit scruffy or whatever, but this willow here has formed a nice, a nice shaped tree. And the rowan also does, or mountain ash does, a lovely upright form. So they're handy to, pop in round the farm. I just mentioned the wildflower areas. If you have a wildflower area, fantastic, and we'd love to hear about it or send us a photo or whatever. But they're probably not so common now, and it's just the best habitat for pollinators. We've done a wee leaflet that will be on the website, just on celebrating the wonderful Ireland's lovely meadows and pastures. So have a look at that on our website. And then just really allowing wildflowers to grow around the farm. We mentioned this non-farmed area, so that's a win-win for both of us, maybe, just to have those areas. That's a field margin. They're on a tillage farm, the first image, and they had been cultivating right up to the edge. They've moved out. They see the value now of moved out, and that farm has stopped using insecticide. So that wetland, the third image there, where you see a bit of a ditch going through the farm. You can see how wild that is, wild and woolly it is in there. So that farm is in particularly trying to get habitat for hoverflies and other species. So they know to leave those areas to let the beneficial insects. And we may look at an area, I put that little middle picture in, you might think, what's that? It's not very important, but if you look into that, that's got some lovely native plants, and that is so valuable. You might want to cut and lift it once a year just to keep it going. The last wee image there, it was actually a silo, how the tires on the silo, and lo and behold, there's a lesser celandine coming through, so wildflowers pop up everywhere, just to be valued. And I've just put a wee image there. That's from some of our resources just on the different wildflowers. that you might just get to see around the farm and to be encouraged if possible. Then just on the nesting, the bumblebees, they need tussocky grass, and the solitary bees, they go for the summer cavity nesting, and bare soil is for the solitary bees. Some of the solitary bees, most of the solitary bees will be bare ground. So that's the type of habitat they need. The ERP project has produced this lovely how to create solitary bee nests on your farm, which the farmers have helped to write. So that's a really good resource as well, if you're interested. Just to mention about overwintering and also those hoverflies that I mentioned that are so important. What insects need in the winter, they need a bit of, I would call that, if you call that texture or scruffy, so a wee bit of habitat there for them to hide away and to protect them in the winter. That photo there with the ivy, there's an old tree trunk in there. So that's really valuable as well for the hoverflies that use wood as their larva stage, and also for any that are overwintering as well. Leaf litter, fantastic. The moths and butterflies have the cocoons, and the hoverflies, some of them will be in the leaf litter. So I know on edges of farms, you just see leaf litter, just fantastic, and to be valued really. In your garden as well, maybe not to be so tidy with moving the leaves as well is fantastic. And again, any wee wetland areas for some of the hoverflies that use the are aquatic and use wee ditches or whatever. And another action would be to minimise artificial fertiliser. So it got a wee bit of a boost last year with prices, but just mind where you're applying the fertiliser. If you can just move out from the base of the hedge would be fantastic. You know, just to let those areas not be enriched, and it may damage your hedge. And then there was more interest, I suppose, last year in the clover leys and multi-species swards and herbal leys, so that we could reduce our inputs. So that's a win-win. And then I would just say a wee bit about pesticide input. The herbicides, I wouldn't particularly like that look of the wee image there of what herbicides does to grassland. You know, after you don't see it for a wee while and then it just goes brown. And I think, do you think people like that? I'm not quite sure why they like it, but you know, it would have been easier maybe just to, I'm not sure why you would do it, you know, just get the strimmer out, or yeah, might take it as much time as getting the knapsack out. So yes, protect the base of hedge again from any spraying, and any nest sites as well that you can see around your farm, any nice sunny soil banks or anything. If you could just move away from treating on any of those. Again, with insecticides, if you can reduce the number and frequency of applications, that would be fantastic. And you know, the calm days, spray on calm days, and use low drift nozzles. And again, bees and pollinators are most active in the heat of the day, the middle of the day. So try to avoid that time. And if we can just use less, that would be fantastic. They do have an impact on our pollinating insects and biodiversity. Just going back to that tillage farm, and they had stopped using insecticide, and these are just some of the wonderful natural predators that they had, that you know, those areas trying to bring in the natural predators. And this wee wasp in the first one, it sort of mummifies the aphid. So that's a little, I found a little aphid that it had, that's it in a mummified state from the bracconoid wasp. And then ladybirds as well, they have larvae that their larvae munch on aphids, so another one to encourage. And I showed you the hoverfly larva, that's in the top image there. And then just below that, the longer, thinner one, that's a lacewing larva. So I did go back and look at this leaf maybe 4 days later, and where the aphids were, it was just a black mush. So they had done their job and moved on. Just nearly, we're now just another, we're on 9, action 9. I mean, traditional orchards were in the past near the farmyard, and we would have used them for you know, getting crops for the home and maybe selling a little. But they're a lovely habitat, and those beautiful flowers in the spring. That cup-shaped flower is just perfect for bumblebees. So good source of nectar and pollen, and then we've got good pollinators around. We will get a good crop, and they're low intense management, so you can get nice grassland below, and maybe with a hedgerow, some crab apples nearby as well to help pollinate your apple trees. They would need cross-pollinated to get those good crops. So a lovely habitat to have around your farm. And just one that you may not think, but the farm garden, it can also be a lovely refuge for pollinators. And you could even have some native plants within it. I mean, the birchfoot trefoil looks wonderful. I would replace it in the rockery any day. So just what you do in your garden is also can be, you know, beneficial. And some farms have, you know, you have a wee bit of space more and you've had a nice garden. So even a little wildflower area, even a little, you know, you could do a little meadow area on your lawn, save you time. No cutting every week. You know, just cut and lift at the end as well. And I would just direct you to pollinators.ie and our farmland section. Lots of resources in there and videos and wee guides as well. And we also did seasonal actions that you can take for pollinators on the farm. And if you would like to monitor any of the pollinator species, this would be your little basic sort of thing that you could do. It's an app that you can download, a flower insect time count, and it will guide you through. And there's information also on the National Biodiversity Data Centre website just on how you can do that count. So if there's a, you know, maybe you want to try monitoring your hawthorn every spring, and that could just, you know, you can see how well you do. You just 10 minutes, and you don't have to be an expert. You just very basic. So it's a lovely wee way just to see, well, is the hawthorn doing better this year than last year? So just the encouragement to give, you know, lots of small actions taken together can really help solve the big problems of our biodiversity loss. And just to thank Teagasc for their support, especially Catherine has been so valuable, and the Department of Agriculture then for supporting for support. And I'll just finish off if there's any, that's contact details and the website again. That's me.
Thank you very much, Ruth. A really excellent presentation there, and easy to follow, and nice to see some lovely exposition of the amazing biodiversity that we have in this country. Who would believe 31,500 different species that we have in this country? Mm-hmm. It really is a reminder of the wealth that we have in our countryside. Just a reminder to everybody, we have a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen there. Please do use it. And I should have told you, Ruth, before we started, we have a very informed audience joining us every Friday morning. And so I can see already the really insightful questions coming through. So do keep them coming. And a special welcome to our audience joining us from across Europe as well. I see we have people from Zagreb, Germany, Brussels, and all over Ireland, of course, as well. So you're all very welcome this morning. Just if I could start off, Ruth, I mean, you talked about the endangered species, or the threatened, the species that are threatened with extinction. I think you said 1/3 of our bees are threatened with extinction. How urgent or how imminent is that an issue for Ireland?
Well, that it is worrying, that continual decline, you know, and they're some of them are getting more isolated, which is never good. You know, you want that they need to be moving around. So anything that we can do now is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is that, you know, death by 1,000 cuts or whatever, you know, it's just that gradual. So yeah, anything that we can do. And it's just small actions, really. If everyone's doing it across the landscape, that's just so beneficial. And
it is, look, we sometimes forget, we hear about climate crisis, but we are also in a biodiversity crisis that is sometimes overlooked. Catherine, a lot of really excellent questions coming through there, but maybe could you tell us about your own role there in the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and what's happening from a Teagasc perspective?
Well, I suppose I just represent Teagasc on the steering group from the beginning, and support Dr. Una Fitzpatrick and Jane Stout from Trinity were the two who led this initiative. And you know, there's a body, a group then on the steering group which support them and help them. But of course, Teagasc has a huge role in getting the message out to the right people. On the farmland side, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan obviously covers lots more than farmland and is extremely valuable there, because I think the problem we often face in farmland is that people see things being done in tidy towns and by councils and assume that that's the right thing. So we need farmers, for us to progress in farming, we need the general public to understand, and the All Ireland Pollinator Plans works with all those different groups. So if everybody understands then why the farmer is leaving the margin, you know, to grow rather than spraying it or having it as a lawn, then they understand it's not, you know, a lazy farmer. So I've always found that, you know, farmers do what they think others want them to do. So that's, I think, the real value of the Pollinator Plan is the widespreadness of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I've seen some photos on Twitter of the yellowed grass around along verges, and I've seen other farmers calling it out, in fact, and saying, look, this isn't necessarily the way to go. So so it's good to see that level of awareness out there. Ruth, just before we go to questions, you mentioned a festival of biodiversity that's taking place at the start. Is it the May bank holiday weekend? Is that
the month of May?
The month of May. So
Yes.
From the 1st of the 31st of May. Have you any details you can share with us at this stage?
No, just keeping a lookout on social media.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, that's maybe something we can look at closer to the date. So Catherine, questions, really extra questions coming through there.
Questions, and I suppose the old chestnut, Ruth, coming through. They've been so inspired by the lovely pictures of the meadows you have shown. People want to plant them. So what planting on farms? Can you comment or give your recommendations on that? Planting flowers on farms.
The Pollinator Plan wouldn't recommend that you plant. We would recommend, you know, a low input. So just, you know, move back from the area, stop putting any enrichment in it or any pesticides, and cut and lift, and just patience, and see if it will develop. And it will have some plants pop up that farmers may not be so fond of, but it's just to give it time and, you know, let it the enrichment go out of it.
And a related question, Ruth, sometimes people, if they have inherited or come across those beautiful fields, they think we'll put a fence around them and we won't touch them. Can you comment on the need for the management? Yeah, I think you touched on it in your talk, that they need
species rich grassland or pasture. Yes. If it's good, you gotta look at how you've been managing it, you know, because we do have the knowledge, and obviously that who the farmer has been managing it in the right way. So I would continue that management. If it's cut and lift, usually at the end of the season, if the farmer wants to take a hay crop, it's usually July that would be cut and lift. And then if it's an area that you want, you know, just depends on what the farmer's doing. but the later will be more beneficial to pollinators. But we have to work with with farmers.
Okay, but the key point is that it does need to be cut, or it will turn into scrub and you lose the flowers, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And another very good question, not so much on the meadows, but maybe on those areas around the farm. At what time should you trim, the growth on these, let's call them margins or something, to minimize interference with invertebrates in dormancy? Well,
if you're the field margin, a sunny field margin is going to be the best for the feeding pollinators. So if we would recommend end of the season, sort of September, cut and lift if that's possible, or move the fence back and let it graze off, whatever's handy for their system. Then the north sides, you could leave an area that you're just cutting every other year, or that's where the hibernating insects would head, the cooler parts of the field margin, so that they don't wake up too early in spring. But the cut and lift's great on the sunny margin, just to let that develop.
But I suppose I'm also thinking about, and I think the person is thinking about, farm roadways. As you drive into farm, you'd have laneways, not part of the field margins, let's say, the general areas, and this would be very relevant to the general public in your garden. But the same message, maybe leave it. We saw that beautiful picture of the bumblebee going to nest in the grass.
Yes.
So some long grass is good. So that's where you're every second year. Yeah. Okay.
That base of the hedge is just, it's the business, so really. And if you can come.
Sorry, but I was just when you see that grass and the bumblebee looking for it, and you're worried, then have we cut it because we're,
any wee scruffy corners are great. Yeah.
So a variety, I suppose.
Tussocky grass is the business as well. And
We have a question coming through that's I think maybe both of you could comment on. It's one we have quite regularly around the commercially available pollinator-friendly wildflower seed mixes that often contain unsuitable and non-native species. And what's your view on those, on introducing them? Maybe Ruth, if you could start.
It's probably not necessary. So I see what you've got, work with what you've got, and our insects are quite complicated, really. They need our native species. They're adapted to our native species, and they want the food from, they need it all year round. They just don't need a big boost of colour in the summer. So it's definitely just to work what you've got with what you got, and a wee bit of patience, and see, what happens.
Yeah, and I suppose I'd add to that, because I found that so frustrating. It started me doing my weekly comments on growing wild, to value what we have growing as part of our natural biodiversity. Because the biggest problem I find with the message about planting something is that you're replacing something that is already, we're not valuing what's there. And I suppose could I ask Ruth another question there about you? Again, we saw some lovely flowery pictures, but can you comment on the value of some of maybe the more ugly looking plants that are native and that are there? I presume, do all plants have a value for pollinators, or other biodiversity perhaps? Because I know you're very keen to push that we're not just talking pollinators.
Absolutely. I mean, nature's so in tune, isn't it? We can't even understand how complex it is, really, after all, all this, and everything has a wee niche. So some of those caterpillars just feed on certain plants. And I always would push bramble and ivy, which you know how it is on the farm, that you just want to, clean up that wee corner. But just this season, even if you have a wee bramble area on a sunny day, just see how much, how many pollinators are on it. I think it's one of the species on the fit count, or you could do your wee fit count, flower insect time count, 10 minutes, just count how many are feeding on it. So yeah, you might have to clear it in some places and stuff, but we corner a bramble in a sunny area, it would just be fantastic for pollinators. And then that ivy later in the season, it's actually critical to our bumblebees. They're just trying to beef up before they go to sleep for the winter. So there's not much in flower, maybe a bit of knapweed, maybe a bit of late vetch, but the ivy, just fantastic amount of food for the late pollinators.
So all have their value. And
yes, yes.
Probably a simple question for you to answer. Is it possible to buy pollinators, particularly the likes of hoverflies, and introduce them?
I wouldn't recommend that at all.
Yeah,
you get the habitat right, and they've got wings, especially hoverflies. They do amazing. Even those little marmalade hoverflies migrate from Europe when the wind is right. So no need to introduce. And your main priority is to have a wee bit of species, of flower rich habitat, and the pollinators will move in.
Would you have a concern for promoting forestry on agricultural marginal land, which could be the more flower rich existing meadows?
Well, yes, any area that would be planted, you would have to take care, what criteria you were using to where you plant trees. Yeah. So yep, some habitats are they'd be too valuable, as semi-natural habitat to plant. So you would just have to take care where you plant.
Okay.
But there's a lot of focus. It's just a remark or an observation there. We focus a lot on the pollination function of these species, but then often these species are food for other animals up the food chain as well. I know bats, for example, moths are a very important food source for them, and that interconnectedness is just can't be underestimated.
You get a good healthy insect population, and then that's for the birds, the bats, and then for the the higher species as well. So yes, it's all connected and linked in. Yeah.
Ruth, you had a lovely fact there about the 300 meters, and somebody's wondering, is that the are flowers within that okay, or is there something about 150 meters? Is it the closer the better, or
some trees they don't fly far, so you just need to just if we have it's sort of continual flower rich areas, not just isolated, and there's there will be variation, but they've sort of given an estimate that they only fly about 300 meters from their nest, and if they have to fly further, research has been done to say they're not as successful that season. As you can imagine, they're using more energy to go and get food, so they'll be not able to lay as many eggs or have enough of those little pollen baskets that they put with the eggs. So it's just stressing them a wee bit more if they have to go further.
Can you comment on the current work that's fencing off water courses or even dry drains, that may hold water at some stage, that the value or they're likely to have, for sheltering, for any values, fencing off those areas as we're doing under acres?
Yeah. That's the tussocky areas, and trees may establish, you might get willow, and if it's wet, willow in there. So yes, those areas will help pollinating insects and wider biodiversity. And I think the question is for
the nest sites as well. Could they be useful?
What's that? Sorry, Catherine?
Yeah, could they be useful as nest sites?
Yes, the tussocky grass, the bumblebees, and then you'll get a bit of deadwood in there. I think I get laughed at because I'm very into deadwood, but a lot of our insects need that deadwood as part of their life cycle. So it's never to be too keen on the tidying up of the deadwood as well, and the leaf litter as well. Very very essential really in the landscape.
Question here, Ruth, around the value of firs and bracken for biodiversity. How would you rate those as food for pollinators?
The firs, yes, that has the flowers are long season. They come out. There's some out now. Yes, that will supply food for pollinators. The bracken, not so much for pollinators. There is no food value in it for pollinators.
I would have imagined so. Yeah.
And
Just while you mentioned that some of the furs of the gorse flowering. I mean, this changing of seasons or earlier budding, is that something the National Biodiversity Data Centre is concerned about or monitoring?
Yes, I probably
the
should have
impact of
mentioned that the Farmers Wildlife Calendar. It's happening now. So if wonderful if you can put your records in of when willow first, I actually don't remember the species, but if you go onto the National Biodiversity Farmers Wildlife Calendar, and the blackthorn will be one of them, and it's just when those things are starting to flower, and I think it's on its 3rd or 4th year now, and then we'll be able to build up information on what changes. And we would be concerned, if those change so much, and when insects come out, just with a bit of, is the term climate chaos, just with a wee bit of change predicted for the future.
Mark, I just wanted to follow on from your gorse and your
yes,
onto the real baddies, and could Ruth comment on our invasive alien species? I'm not sure if rhododendron is good. That's what the question is, but I would further to, because I know Himalayan balsam, the bees love it. So what's that conundrum? We have these really baddies in the landscape. Are they good for bees, and are bees encouraging them to keep pollinating them?
Well, our stand on that would be, if you can control them and remove them, that would be more beneficial as a whole to biodiversity in the landscape. Yes, they may get some food from it, but you would call them bullies. So they're knocking out our native species, and they just keep going. So it's good to get them quick, not let them get established, because it can be so much work to control them, and be careful how you control them. Go to the data center invasives section, and lots of information on what you can do there. But it's definitely, and there's other impacts they can have. For example, the balsam, if it's they like the wet, and if it's on a riverbank or whatever, it's like it's related to the busy lizzie, so it just melts in the winter, and that can leave your riverbank exposed, and cause problems. So whereas our native vegetation would stay put and nice root structure and keep a nice firm bank. So nip it in the bud, I would say, anything that's popping up that's on that line.
Just a question for Catherine and Ruth, you might want to join in on this one, but what sort of financial supports are available to farmers for creating habitats or supporting biodiversity on their farms? We have, I know the acres is probably the main vehicle for that.
Well, the acres, I mean, at the end of the day, it covers so many farmers and farmland. And again, Ruth might be interested to comment, because I'm not sure if she knows the details. I mean, I'd be very familiar with them, and I'd be very happy with the actions, in particular the move towards the grass margins, fencing off the margins along hedges. I don't know how popular it will turn out to be. I'm a big advocate of it, following on from what Ruth is saying, but fencing off the margins, and fencing off the water courses, like just leaving space to nature, and then managing it, cutting all right. So acres is the big one. Ruth, any other sources of help for farmers financially?
No, acres as there's the hedges, the margins, and there was a wee option for traditional orchard, establishing a traditional orchard if you wanted. So yeah, there's just definitely to get advice if that would suit your farm.
Yeah, and I think the point should be also made that a lot of these measures don't cost a lot of money, and
absolutely,
that maybe it's a case of just
being a wee bit more aware.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So,
just the role of beech hedges, not a native. Where does that fit in for bees?
It'll not benefit pollinators as much. There's no flower or food value there for the pollinator. So yeah, just those native species are wonderful.
There was a question about the design of ponds now, but in general, watercourses and ponds, I suppose they provide a different suite of flowers. So while water isn't necessarily related to pollinators as it would be for mayflies or, you know, other invertebrates. I assume water in the creation of ponds, and that would diversify plant species and be good for bees. Any comment?
Yeah, wetland plants are a fantastic source of food for pollinators, and those 180 hoverflies, we haven't really appreciated those as much in the landscape to now, and quite a few of them have aquatic larva stage. So yeah, water is very important to pollinators. Yeah.
Are there posters available showing the bumblebees and solitary bees?
Yes, there are. You can go to our website, and there's those 2 posters that I showed in the presentation. You can download them, or if I'll be taking some of them around some of the events this year, so have a look out for the pollinator plan, any of the Teagasc events or the likes, or Ploughing Championship.
Yeah, maybe that's something we should consider, because I know a lot of people have inquired as to where they can get access to those posters. So
yeah,
we could use our Teagasc network to get some of them out as well. Maybe that could be something we could do. Look, we're coming close to the end of the session, and but with just a few last questions there. There's you know, request for information about the removal of furze. There, is that still required for farmers to remove furze, or is it now recognized as an important pollinator friendly species? There's been quite a few changes around that whole ineligible spaces on farms. Catherine, maybe you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think this year the schemes will allow more areas on the farm. Up to 50% of a parcel which may not be eligible will mean the parcel will be eligible. So that's a huge change. I suppose furze, I don't know, would Ruth agree? Like, furze can be good, but I don't know that we want areas. Furze can be invasive too and nothing else grow. So while furze are a hedgerow plant and they are native, it's a bit like hazel and burn. We don't want to see too much of anything. Would that be fair, Ruth?
Yeah, and just in the wrong place as well. If it's you know, it can get. I think that's why it gets out of you know, out of balance. So yeah, just be careful, and yeah, might need to be kept in check.
Okay, great. Well, look, I think we have got through most of the questions this morning. So sincere thanks to everybody who submitted really excellent questions this morning. Ruth, thank you very much for really excellent presentation. Lots of compliments coming through in the Q&A session as well, part this morning. So, and Catherine, thank you very much for your really insightful knowledge with all of these this area. You've been working this area a long time, so it's great to have your experience both with the actual science and also the policy and scheme side of things. It's great to have that knowledge available to us. Just to say thank you to Yvonne Maher in the background, and Andy Boland and Pat Murphy, our series coordinators. And next week we'll be joined by Daniel Henn from Solihead Farm, attached to Teagasc Moor Park, and Daniel will be talking about scenarios exploring the national herd and grassland management targets to achieve climate targets. So that's next Friday morning. So with that, I want to say thanks again to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next Friday. So enjoy the weekend.
Thanks very much.